Hello, everybody. My name is Kyle. This is Kyle's Trail Miles, and today I'm giving you my take on the top 4 things you should train or be aware of as you begin your journey in trail running, or maybe you're training for that next race. So the first one is extremely obvious. We've all heard it. The second one should be obvious, but for some reason it's not with some people. The third one I've heard talked about, we've all kind of heard talked about, but I'm going to explain it a little bit more in detail. And then the fourth one, I have actually never heard in all the YouTube videos I have watched anyone ever talk about this in trail running. And I have been sort of, preaching this for a long time. So let's get into it. Number one, again, super obvious, but you have to be able to cover long distances. So in your training, if you've never run more than a half marathon and you're going to go in your first 50K, for example, that's probably going to be a challenge. We all get that. And so the biggest thing there is just cover long distances, but it doesn't have to be like running. It can be a lot of walking in there as well, especially if you're new to ultra trail running or you're an intermediate even. There's going to be a bit of walking depending on how long the distance is. And so to sort of train your body to be able to walk for a bit and then get back into running is important. That was probably one of the most difficult things for me when I first started out, because back in the day when I ran, I was, that sort of old school mindset, and I did, like, walking to me was a failure. Like if I went for a 10K run in my local neighborhood or whatever, and I had to walk, like that was a horrible situation, and I couldn't get back running again, just mentally. Like once I had to walk, we've all been there, but you got to get past that, because you've got to train your body to walk and then be able to get back into running. You got and so I feel like that one's pretty obvious. You got to be able to cover long distances, and so we've got to train our bodies to do that. Number two, again, should be very obvious, but it's weird how you see every now and then where it's not with some people, and that is the ability to cover elevation, do elevation. And most ultra marathons, at least I haven't really seen any that aren't, cover a reasonable amount of elevation. And if you've never spent time doing elevation of any kind, whether it be like I live in Lethbridge here, the hills of Lethbridge, or in the mountains, elevation takes a ton of time. Like just to cover elevation, it's crazy how much time it takes to work against gravity like that, compared to running on flat ground. And then number two, just the sheer effort that it takes to cover elevation. And if you're not trained, if your body is not ready for elevation, man, your day is done. And we see that all the time, where, I mean, not that of course I would ever do this, but if someone were to sort of creep someone on Strava who's going in an ultra trail or an ultra race, and like here in Lethbridge, for example, we have one every year, the Lost Soul Ultra, and it's very hilly here in Lethbridge, and the elevation, although it's only 67 meters at a time, it's straight up. Like there is no gradual, walk in the park climbs. Like you are steep hiking up, like very steep inclines, and it can be very challenging. But if you just looked at it on paper, you'd be like, that's 50K, 1,300 meters of elevation. That's a few hilly hills, no big deal. But man, like when I see people out here that haven't trained hills in their lead up to the race, it just crushes them. And you can see that in sort of how it plays out. So your body has to be able to work in elevation. It has to be able to move through elevation and then continue on. And so yeah, elevation, that's my jam. Obviously, again, that one's obvious, but it's surprising how much it's not obvious. And the first time I remember I went into the mountains, into a mountain trail run, because I've done all my training mostly here in Lethbridge on the hills, it was just crazy how it's like it's like an hour and I'm still climbing this mountain, whereas here in the hills it's like after 3 or 4 minutes you're kind of at the top. And so you just got to train for the race, right? We all kind of get that one. Number 3 is one that I do hear talked about a reasonable amount, but it just is so important, is being able to absorb and digest food while putting out effort. And it's just something that most runners who have not been in the sort of trail arena wouldn't really know about. I mean, yeah, marathon runners a little bit, but it's a few gels and things. But like we're talking like in a long marathon or in a long trail run, you're eating like full meals, or you're trying to, you're packing in calories and then putting out large efforts. And stomach issues are I mean, they'll kill you, as I have lots of experience in. And so you've got to be able to train your stomach to eat, and you can do that in training. So, have a few, get some food in you and then go for a run. I mean, I'm not saying every time, but at least a couple times a week, put yourself in the position where you have to absorb and digest food while running. And it's going to suck the first few times or the first while, but it's like anything else. Your body will adapt, and you'll find what foods work for you, and you'll move forward. So, and actually just this morning, I was dropping my daughter off at school, and she's 8, and she said, she was sort of complaining that they don't, of course, they don't call it lunch or recess anymore. It's called nutrition breaks. But she was complaining that her nutrition break is now moved before recess, where it used to be after recess. And I was like, okay, like, what's the big deal there? And she said, well, then my food doesn't have time to digest. And I said to her, I said, no, this is great. I said, you want to eat your food and then immediately go out and play. Because I said, someday when you're the best ultra trail runner in the world, that's going to be a great skill set for you to have. So let's start adapting early. And she looked at me like, okay, like you're losing your mind again. And, but it's true. Like, let's start that process early. So that's number 3, is learn to digest while putting out efforts. And you got to train that. Number 4, and this is one that I have never heard anybody talk about, although it's sort of implied in some things, but I always say, like, if somebody is somebody that I know is new to trail running, or they're going to sort of take this on, and they're this isn't so much for training per se, but for like a race environment. It's not about being able to run long distances, although it is, but that's obvious. And it's not about elevation, because you should be training elevation. The secret, the key to doing well in a race or meeting your goals and not suffering too much, it's, et cetera, depending on, or irrelevant of what skill level you're at, is the ability to power hike a steep incline, whether it be in the hills here or the mountains or whatever, but put in some pretty steep, long effort elevation, get to the top of that hill or mountain and start running. And I know what you're thinking. You're like, oh, okay, like that's pretty obvious, but it's not. And most people, when they get to the top of that hill, they need a breather, and then they got to run. But to be able to do that elevation and then just immediately start running, it's a crazy skill set that takes a long time, in my opinion, to develop, because your legs basically have to like recover from that climb while running, and it takes a minute or two for that to happen. And one just example that I have of this is, like, I started out in triathlon way back in my 20s, just amateur. Like, I wasn't winning any races or anything, but the first time, and you can't train this, because it's just not the same. But that first race, I can still remember it like it was yesterday. That first race I went in, and I got off the bike, because when you're on the bike in a race, I mean, you're giving it everything you got. The first time I got off the bike and started running, like you bring your bike into the corral. You got to walk your bike in the corral, so you're kind of walking, okay, and then you get out of the corral, and then you start running, and it's like my legs aren't working. Why are my legs not working? And it's like, that was the craziest feeling ever, that first race. And I had it every subsequent race after that. The only difference was, after I started training that better and understanding that feeling, it would be shorter. But that first race, it was like probably like 10-15 minutes of me. I looked like I was drunk out there. And so it's kind of the same thing with trail running, is when you get to the top of that hill or mountain, to be able to just go right into a run. I mean, obviously that's something you can definitely train. And the first few times you do it, you're going to hike up that hill, you're going to start running, and maybe you can only run for 30 seconds, and then you got to stop. Or maybe you can run for a little bit longer. But once you get in the ability to get to the top of that hill or that mountain and start running, for me anyways, the first 30 seconds, it's like, I don't really want to be running. And then after 30 seconds, my legs kind of settle in, and it's like, okay, we're back to normal, and then I'm good to go. But for that first 30 seconds, like, it's a mental, it's a mental challenge sometimes to just keep myself going. And so that's my thing, is I think that's super important. So if I was new-ish to ultra trail running, and I was signed up for my first race or races and that sort of thing, those are the 4 things I would do. I would put in distance. Again, we all get that one. I would definitely work on a lot of elevation just to get your legs ready for that, because that is the number 1 thing you can train. I mean, elevation is something that the more you do it, the better you are at it. That's as simple as that. Number 3, again, being able to digest food. And there was a girl. I was at a race last year, and I was at the starting line, and there was this girl, and I didn't know her, and we were just kind of chatting at the start line. And it was a 50-mile race, and she said, so this must have been 2 years ago, anyways. And she said, she says, we're basically going on a 50-mile picnic. And I was like, yeah, that's a great way to think about it, because it truly is. Like, you're eating the whole time. Like, if you feel great, and this is another thing, not sort of side off, to go on a tangent here, is there's times in every trail race where you feel great. You're like, man, I'm dialed right in. My nutrition, I'm not going to eat whatever it was that I kind of half scheduled to eat at this time, because I just feel too good. That's a disaster, because you feel good now, but you're always how much behind. I mean, I'll get into maybe some segments on my limited knowledge of nutrition, but you can't go by that, because when you're in a 24-hour race or whatever, if you get behind, by the time you realize you're behind on your nutrition, it could be game over. So even though in fact, when you feel great, that's the time you should be eating. Like, you should always feel a little bit like, I've ate too much. So anyways, training that aspect of it. And you can do that even on like a 10K run. Just have a big, again, I'm no doctor. I have nothing medical behind me. Don't listen to me. Do your own research. In fact, don't do anything I say. But what I'll do is I'll sometimes have like a bigger meal, and then I'll immediately go out for a run, and just to sort of, I don't know, get that system working, right? And then number 4, of course, is do elevation and then go for a run. And it doesn't have to be crazy. Go out to your local park that has, a hill a toboggan hill. People in the South probably have no idea what I'm talking about. But just any sort of hill, run up it a few times, and then just go for a 3K run. And then run up it a few times, go for whatever. You get the idea. And so, those are my 4 tips. If I was driving towards a race this summer, those are, 1 and 2 are obvious, but number 3 and 4 are the 2 that I would really try to focus in on. So there you go. Thanks, everyone. And here in Lethbridge right now, I didn't do a race recap video yet this week. I apologize. I will. But man, it is, I think, I don't want to jinx it, but I think today, Friday, February 28th, I think it's going to be the first day I'm getting out in shorts and t-shirt. This is a glorious day. And tomorrow, Saturday, it's supposed to be like really nice. Like, we're talking shorts and t-shirt. I mean, I don't want to jinx it. I'm not going to talk about it anymore. All right. See everyone.